the Russian geopolitical situation is quite bad because they don't have much access to the world ocean. They have a few navy bases. They have Murmansk in the ice, in the Arctic Ocean, not very good place. Vladivostok, also a very cold place. They got Kaliningrad in the Baltic Sea, which is first of all isolated from the rest of Russia, and second, they have to go out through a NATO country, Denmark. And then they have Sevastopol and Crimea, which again was in a foreign country, so Putin conquered it, because he was about to lose it. The agreement was expiring. So he conquered Crimea in order to have that navy base in Sevastopol. But again, he has to go out through a NATO country, Turkey, and then pass through Greece also. Therefore, he wanted navy bases overseas in warm climates in friendly nations. And in 2008, he announced that he was going to create navy bases in Libya, Syria, Yemen, and Venezuela. The Arab Spring came in 2011 and wiped out Libya and Syria and Yemen. Those three countries where the Arab Spring led to civil war are the same three countries where Putin wanted a navy base. In Tunisia, there is now calm and democracy, and no Russian plan for navy base. You see a connection here? All right, let's go back to Syria. There was the non-violent uprising in Syria that started March 11, 2011. After a few weeks, the regime repressed it violently and it turned into an armed conflict, a civil war. In 2013, the US started finally to supply some arms to the Free Syrian Army. And shortly after, we're talking about months, ISIS was set up in eastern Syria, and it was set up in a city, Raqqa, that was under government control until then. They didn't conquer it, they didn't take it neither from the government nor from the rebels. They were just handed it. And now they are selling, ISIS is selling petroleum to the Assad government. Doesn't that seem like an odd kind of cozy arrangement? And then when Putin goes in and says he's going to attack ISIS, what does he do? He attacks the Free Syrian Army and the other rebels. It seems to me there's something's not smelling right here. And ISIS, what is it? The origin. They have been very successful militarily. And if you look into the ranks, you find there officers from Saddam Hussein's army. We know that the Russians had very close relationships with the officers in Saddam Hussein's army before the invasion. And now these officers were in camps during the occupation, and then they were let free in 2011, and now many of them are in ISIS. So ISIS has a leadership of officers with good relations to Putin's Russia. You see a connection again? So why then would Putin do this? Why would he be behind and maybe facilitating with seed money an organization that's so horrible? Well, the logic is that in diplomacy, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Assad was the enemy of the United States. Obama wants Assad gone. But by creating an enemy that's worse than Assad, by making ISIS the worst enemy, the logic is that Assad then should become the friend of the United States. So therefore, ISIS has to be horrible. It has to be worse than Assad. That's not an easy task to accomplish, considering how Assad has been beating down the protesters and using chemical weapons. So they did the beheadings, throwing hundreds of people, and publishing the videos on the internet. It was important for people in the West to see this. It had to shock the conscience. And they also destroyed archaeological monuments, another thing carried out exclusively to shock the conscience. Now, once ISIS had been established as something so horrible, the next problem is to make sure that the West sees that Putin also is fighting ISIS, that Putin is on the same side as the West. And to do that, he sent in his military, sent cruise missiles, and did this big show to show that he's attacking ISIS. However, the West kind of saw through that he attacked a lot of the Free Syrian Army also. And the attacks on ISIS may have been mostly symbolic, bombs in the desert. So he uses his propaganda presence on the internet to spread his version, that Putin is the only one who's fighting ISIS, and the US actually was behind creating ISIS. That's the Russian propaganda version. And now, the next step, take the fight to Western Europe. They have to get people to react in the West. And once that happens, they also threaten attacks here in the US. The whole purpose of this is to force people in Western Europe and the US to want to go there and defeat ISIS. And while doing that, they have to switch and become allies with Assad. That's the whole plan, as I see it. I don't trust Putin 1 inch. I think that he's playing the West and that the bad guy in this is Putin. So what's the way then? If it's the way that I'm suspecting, what is the way to deal with ISIS? The way to deal with ISIS is to get rid of Assad. Because as long as Assad is there, ISIS has possibility to recruit people and Putin has something to fight for. Once Assad is gone, Putin has no more interest in Syria. He's defeated there.